we can mute you, so don't be surprised if we hear background noise that is especially loud, then we might have to mute you. Okay. All right, so it's 9:02 and I will get us started. My name is Giovanna Fiorino Iannace and I'm this year's president of the Westchester Library Association. So good morning and welcome to WLA's first virtual midwinter conference. It's wonderful to have you join us today after an arduous year of unprecedented challenges. This period has underscored the importance of libraries and maintaining relationships and connections with our communities. Our theme for 2021 is Libraries Embrace Change, which cannot be overstated, especially given current circumstances. WLA officially started in 1938 with a few librarians gathering to discuss common issues and how to improve library services. Over 80 years later, WLA is still providing a venue for open discussion, professional development, and continuing education among school, academic, and special libraries and local history collections. Today's program on new technologies and best practices in libraries and archive collections was originally planned for last year's annual conference before it was postponed. Fortunately, we were able to reschedule the panel discussion for our midwinter conference. We are grateful to Hillel Arnold, Robert Cartolano, Lisa Kropp, and Kathryn Shaughnessy for joining us today and sharing their knowledge and expertise in their respective roles. Before we introduce our speakers, I would like to welcome co-chairs of the Professional Development Committee, Megan Fenton and Krishna Hargan, who will discuss WLA's Professional Development Award. Vice President, President-elect Kim Stucco will follow with some announcements about future events. So I will turn this over to Krishna.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So each year, the Westchester Library Association awards up to 2 $500 scholarships. This award is designed to assist WLA members pursuing professional development activities and courses that will contribute to or enhance their performance in a library career. This can include, but is not limited to, conferences and other CE courses. For example, if you plan to attend the NILA conference this year or to register for an online training course, these awards can help cover the costs and associated fees for those things. These awards are available to librarians, clerks, and library assistants alike. We're now accepting applications for these awards, and you can find a link to those as well as application instructions on the WLA website. And I'll post that link in the chat as well, or Megan will do it for me. On the website, you can also find the essays from our most recent award recipients. So you can read about what they were able to accomplish with the support of these scholarships. The application deadline is April 16th, 2021. And recipients will be announced at our annual conference in May. But please get your applications in soon, and please tell your coworkers about this opportunity as well. Spread the good word. Thanks.
Thanks, Krishna. So we'll start with Kim Stucco announcing some future events.
Hello. Our first workshop of the new year will be focusing on job interview skills for the COVID-19 period and beyond. Presented by Jean Nelson and Lynn Leese of Prowess on Monday, March 1st at 4 p.m. Participants will learn how to successfully navigate a job interview during the pandemic, about online etiquette, and current technical aspects of conducting an online interview. Registration will open soon on WLA's website. WLA's annual conference will be taking place virtually in early May and focus on balancing change, libraries and new concepts in 2021. We are currently working on the agenda and are focusing on breakout sessions that address topics you have expressed an interest in hearing more about. Additional details will be forthcoming next month. If you would like to serve on the conference committee, please contact me via email at kstucco, that's STUCKO, @WLSmail.org. In the chat box, you will find a link to the exit survey for today's program. We appreciate your feedback as well as the speakers. As an incentive, we are raffling one free registration to our annual conference to one lucky winner who submits the survey before February 27th. The winner will be announced on February 28th. Enough for announcements. Now for the first speaker introduction. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Hillel Arnold. Hillel Arnold leads the Rockefeller Archive Center's Digital Strategies team, which drives the ethical application of technology across the organization by connecting people to systems and expertise. He is active in standards making and maintenance bodies and has served on the Society of American Archivists Technical Subcommittee on Describing Archives, a content standard, and encoded archival description roundtables. Hillel has worked as an archivist at the Tamanin Library, Robert F. Wagner Library Archives, Foundation for Landscape Studies, and the Woody Guthrie Archives. He holds an MA in History from New York University and an MLIS from Long Island University's Palmer School. Hillel?
All right, good
Is
morning,
he
everybody.
unmuted?
I should be.
There we go.
Yeah. Good morning,
Okay.
everybody. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Giovanna. And thanks to all of you for being here in the middle of a pandemic. I'm really happy to be with you and be able to talk a little bit about how we think about technology at the Rockefeller Archive Center. So for those of you that don't know us at all, we're a private research institution, AKA an archive. We're founded in 1974, so significantly after WLA. And we originally were founded as an archival home for the collections associated with the Rockefeller family and their philanthropic work. So since then, the scope of our collections has grown substantially in size and also in collecting area. And so we're now really a repository for the study of philanthropy around the world. Structurally, we are divided into these two divisions, an archives division, which has teams that are also focused on the idea of the records life cycle. So there's 4 of them there. And then we have a research and education division, which leads our outreach efforts to students, scholars, and educators, both locally and internationally. So like many of you, the effects of this pandemic have been pretty profound on us. We've been working remotely since March 2020. So it's all coming up on a year. That means that there have been no researchers in the building, and that staff are only allowed back into the building in a very limited way. So, for a collections-based organization, which we are, this is tough, right? The physical access to our collections is very limited. And it also limits certain kinds of work that can happen, such as new digitization, which again impacts access. So while that has happened, we've also found this to be a moment to really renew and or take on some new opportunities. So we've taken the opportunity to really invest in ourselves organizationally and really dig into professional development. We've also been trying to take the challenges of the past year pretty seriously and try and engage in anti-racist and anti-white supremacist work across the organization. Not really going to talk about that today, but that is a thing that's happening. And then we've also used this as a moment to implement some new technical infrastructure and to invest in some stuff that we already had in place. And that's what I will be talking about today. And then last, I'll just say that I think this moment when sort of the physical spaces of work and home for many of us are collapsing and have collapsed it's been very important, and speaking here as a manager, it's very important for us to draw some pretty clear lines around where work is and where it isn't, particularly in an era of kind of like ubiquitous connectivity. And so that's been a really important thing for us organizationally to think about as well. So that leads me to my team and the digital strategies team and to our work. So we are the digital strategies team for tech curious archivists. None of us were trained as technologists, and everything we've learned on the job. So that has a pretty profound effect on how we think about our work and how we think about technology and technical capacity and human possibility. So I often talk about our work as trying to foster a healthy relationship with technology. And what I mean by that is really that we don't see technology as something that's either to be really feared or adored, right? Somewhere in the middle, that we see it as a tool. And like any tool, it can work for certain purposes. It doesn't work for other purposes. For example, you can't use a screwdriver to put in a nail, right? So you have to understand what the affordances of the tool are, and you have to be able to, it sometimes requires some training and it usually requires some thoughtful application. But we believe that all of our colleagues are capable of that learning and capable of that thought. And so we want them to feel like they have some agency when it comes to technology. So here's our mission statement, which has two key passages bolded, and I'll talk about each of those in turn. That first one there, this idea that we lead, that this team leads the ethical application of technology, I think alludes to the idea that we really want our work to be driven by values. And I think that's just because we feel like it's really important for technical work not to be driven by things like expediency or novelty, because what happens then is that technology ends up getting used for bad purposes, right? So we want to be very clear about what our values are. So you want to do values-driven work, you got to say what your values are. And so over the years, we've developed this set of values. There are, I think, 7 of them, and they're grouped into these 4 main areas. And so we continue to kind of work at these and use these as an aspirational goal, and before every project, we look at how we can connect that work to these goals. The second part of our mission statement I want to talk about, and I'm going to dig into this a lot more, is this idea that the team is really a hub that connects things. It connects people, systems, and expertise. So to get into that a little bit more, and this is kind of like the heart of my talk, the technology triangle, this is what I mean. The idea that technology is really an ecosystem that's built out of these 3 things. And so like any ecosystem, in order for it to maintain itself, it sort of has to have an equilibrium. That's the healthy relationship I was talking about earlier. And it's not also like an ecosystem. It's not just an equilibrium that just happens. It's one that has to be actively worked at and maintained. So at any given moment, people are coming and going into our organizations. We are updating systems. We're adding new systems. We're getting rid of ones, and we're learning things all the time. And we're also, quite frankly, forgetting things as well, which is good because we need to as humans. So all of those things are changing, right? And so it takes work to recalibrate all of that and make sure it's all in balance all the time. So what I'm going to do is talk about what I mean a little bit by each of these things, these systems, people, and expertise, and then talk a little bit about how we're excuse me, I keep trying to go next and the arrow keys are not working. How we use each of these, or how we engage in each of those facets of the Rockefeller Archive Center. I'm going to do that by talking about a project that we just launched on Monday, which is our new catalog, which I'll refer to as DIMES, which is an acronym, but there's also a story behind it, which I'm not going to get into. And it's available at that URL there at the bottom there, but it's a pretty in some ways a pretty standard library catalog that allows you to search for stuff and put in requests to see it or get copies of things, and also allows you to see some digitized content online. But this is a new thing that we just launched, and I think it's a good explanation of some of what I'll be talking about. Okay, so people. People are really the starting and ending point of all of this for us. They're a starting and ending point of technology. So I think when I talk about people, I'm primarily thinking about sort of like the people who will end up using this technology, right, on a day-to-day basis, the end users. And I think it's important to say here that these people aren't just sort of like empty shells. They know things, right? The people who use technology know things. They know a lot of things, or really important things about their work. They know what's hard about it, and they know how to make it better, both for themselves and for other people. So because of that, we're really committed in any technology project to making sure that we know and then engage our users throughout that process. So we start out by any technology process by doing some user research and using these user experience technologies and artifacts, user stories and personas. I'll give you some examples of those later to help us synthesize and make that research explicit. Then as we go along through the process, we'll integrate user testing along with development. So we don't wait until we've finished to test with users. We do that along the way. And that's really important because it helps us avoid the nasty surprise of finding out that at the end of all this work that we've done, that we developed something that nobody wants. And so as we started on our DIMES project, we gathered user stories from our staff, from our colleagues, and then from other similar projects that we're trying to achieve some similar aims. Here's 3. We gathered over 100. The thing I want to point out here is that these all have a user, very specific user that's identified, a user need that's identified from that user, and in some cases, some rationale for that. And then as we went along, we tested at every phase with real users. So even before we had a working prototype, we tested with our design treatments. We talked to users, we got their feedback. I mean, then as we started to write code, we tested particular pieces of the application. So we tested like the search page, right? It was when we'd written that code. And that allowed us to kind of iterate and be agile about how we developed that. And that work was led by my team, by someone from my team, but we got a broad participation from the organization. We pulled together a team of what we called observers, which included representation from every department in the organization. And folks observed the usability tests and then helped us think through what those tests meant and what we should be doing as a result. So that was really important because in addition to kind of like avoiding the surprise thing that I talked about earlier, it also really got broad buy-in from the organization about this project, right? And people were invested in it from the beginning. All right, so expertise. I said earlier, that expertise lives in people's heads, right? People know things. But that expertise only really becomes useful when we're able to pull it out of people's heads and make it explicit and make it concrete and connect it with what other people know. So it's really critical to be able to find that expertise locally and then to use it in order to make technology happen. So, we all know things, right? We all know unique things. Our reference staff, for example, knows a lot more about our collections than I ever will. I might know a lot about a programming language, right? They don't know that. We stick those two things together, we can figure out some ways to provide access to collections remotely, right? If we don't do that, all that great, wonderful knowledge kind of goes to waste. Again, I'll come back to some of these ideas, but this idea that we don't presume technical knowledge, right? We think that like working with technology is kind of a core competency of archival work in 2021, but we also don't presume that anyone's at a particular level there. And so training and learning are really a big part of like what my team does. And trying to build shared knowledge so that we can build shared responsibility, right? So that organizationally we can maintain the technology that we have and we can maintain whatever we will implement in the future. So in this DIMES project that I've been talking about, one of the big ways that this happened was that we had some really messy data that we wanted to clean up. I think we all are familiar with messy data in our systems, right? Something that happens. And so our processing team were the folks who knew the most about that data. They worked with this data on an everyday basis. So they knew where the problems were. And so they were able to shape a project that looked at like, okay, how are we going to do this? And there was some manual intervention they wanted to do. There was some automated cleanup that they thought they could do in bulk. And so my team collaborated on kind of the bulk cleanup piece of it and helping them write some code and some Python scripts to clean things up. that would not have been possible without their expertise of knowing where the problems were and what the edge cases were, and without our expertise of knowing how to write code. So putting those two things together, we were able to sort of both be force multipliers for each other. Last, we come here to systems, which I think are what people think of when they think of technology. And I think I just want to say, like, when I talk about systems, I'm talking not just about like software applications. I'm talking about systems of systems. I'm talking about workflows and processes by which those software applications interact with other applications and with people. So, for example, we think about the process of accessioning a new collection into the archive. That involves that in itself is a system. It involves a set of steps that need to happen. It involves people and particular roles, and it involves several systems. It involves a metadata management system into which you input data about that new collection. It involves a task management system that creates tasks about who needs to do what, and it involves email, because everything involves email. So all those smaller systems need to be able to work together in order for that larger system, that process to be successful. So at the Rockefeller Archive Center, we have two main emphases in systems. The first is a real commitment to openness in everything that we do, and this is a number of aspects. So thing one is that we really believe in open source, which means that we strongly prefer to use open source applications, and that anything code that we write, we will release under an open license. The second is this idea of openness in development, which means that we try and record decisions that we make about what we're doing, why we're doing in real time in a public way. And then last is this idea of open documentation, which is just that we're, as much as possible, we're trying to release documentation of things that we've written. I talked a little bit about this idea that expertise is like only useful when it's made explicit. And so I think documentation is one of the ways in which one of the primary ways in which we do that. And so we really think it's important to release that under an open license as well, so that other people can use it. And then this other aspect of systems that we've been really focused on is this idea of getting systems to be able to communicate with each other without human intervention. We call that systems integration. And so, for example, again, to kind of use the example I used before of creating a new accession, bringing new accession into the archive. Say somebody enters some data into our metadata management system about that new accession. It would be great if in our task management system, a task was automatically created for someone to come and pick up that box and move it into archival storage. So rather than building a task management system into our metadata management system, or vice versa, building a metadata management system into our task management system, the approach that we take there is to build a connection between those two systems. So the data is sent from one to another and triggers are sent from one to another. And so that approach really allows us to kind of have our cake and eat it too in terms of technology and in terms of meeting local needs. It means that we're not making huge customizations to already existing systems. And again, we tend to use existing community supported open source applications. Those things can continue to be maintained by the community, and which includes us, and updated and upgraded easily, but we can still meet our local needs without foisting those local needs into the core code of that application or onto anyone else. So our new application Dimes is, in that vein, is open source. We wrote it using an open source framework called React. And then we released all of the code that we wrote under an MIT license, which is basically says, please take this and do whatever you want with this. But if you break things, it's not our fault. We also, it gets the kind of like open communication, open development thing. We use a platform called GitHub, which some of you probably have heard of, as it's a web platform that allows you to store your code in a repository that's viewable by everyone. It also allows you to create these things called issues, which is using an example of here, which are basically like a way to organize your work. They're tickets to say, this is the work that needs to be done. And you can have some conversation on that issue about how things should or shouldn't be done. So you can see some of that happening here. This is actually one of the shorter conversations that we had. We often go back and forth a lot about how things should be implemented. Lastly, I talked about kind of the user research that we start any technology project with. And this is an example of some of the personas that we developed for DIMES. And those are also openly licensed and openly available as well, so that people can take them and use them in their own work for their own purposes. So as I'm running out of time here, just to wrap up, want to come back to this diagram to say technology is not a thing, right? It's a bunch of things, and it's also the connections between those things. So looking at technology this way for us at the Rockefeller Archive Center has had some pretty profound impacts on how everyone's done their work. And so what I wanted to do as I wrap up is just share 3 hypotheses about technology. They're written as statements, but they're really hypotheses that we're in the process of trying to prove every day. First off is this idea that technology starts with values and not solutions. And I talked about this up front, but I think it's really, really important to just say it over and over and over again, because all around us, I think we can see what happens when technology is not value driven, when it is based around what's easy, when it's based around what's cool and what's new. And so for us, starting with a really clear and explicit statement of values has helped us figure out both what we want to do in particular technology projects, but also what we don't want to do. And I think that's also really important. Second hypothesis, technology is part of everyone's job. And that might seem like super obvious because, like, you know, it's 2021 and here we are all on Zoom. And I think the pandemic has certainly brought this idea kind of like into all of our consciousnesses. That we're like, our work is technologically embedded and there's nothing we can do about it. But what I mean by this is not just that, like, we use technology to do our jobs, but that we take responsibility for using technology to do our jobs. I think when technology gets siloed to a particular department, technical expertise gets siloed to a particular department or role within an organization, when that knowledge is not shared on an ongoing basis, that creates some really large organizational problems. And I've seen it happen over and over and over again. And so that's why my team's job is just to keep pushing that knowledge out all the time. And then the last one is very simple, right? Like, technology really works best when it matches your people and your expertise. So that, again, to come back to the technology triangle and that idea of an ecosystem, that all kind of needs to work together. So it's really about choosing tools that match our available people and what they know. So when we talk about kind of like good technical choices, it's not about, oh, like, what's the fanciest, snazziest, newest thing. It's about what can we actually use and what can we actually maintain. So with that, I think my time is up and I am gonna step back and listen to the rest of the panels and look forward to conversations.
Thank you, Hillel. That was really gave us a lot to think about, and I'm sure people already have questions. So I want to remind everybody, if you do have questions, to write them down. We will be having questions after our break, after all the presentations. So thank you again. I was furiously taking notes. I'm Elaine Provenzano. I'm past president, and it is my delight to introduce Robert Cartolano. Robert Cartolano is the Columbia University Library's Associate Vice President for Technology and Preservation. Rob is a graduate of Columbia University's School of Engineering and Applied Science and has been a member of Columbia's staff since 1986, when he joined Academic Information Systems as a programmer consultant. He held the roles of Manager of Academic Technologies and Senior Director of Client Technology Services for Columbia University Information Technology, where he supervised the development and deployment of the campus-wide learning management system, printing system, electronic classrooms, public computing facilities, and email applications. Since joining the libraries in 2007, Cartolano has supervised the development and implementation of digital preservation storage, the opening of multiple digital centers, blacklight-based unified discovery, recap shared collection services, digital library collections, copyright advisory services, and digital project management. Rob served as treasurer of the DuraSpace Board of Directors, is a member of the Lyricist Leaders Circle, and plays leadership roles for the Fedora and Vivo community-based open source platforms. Rob has been the president of the Eastchester Public Library Board for the past 10 years. He is currently coordinating efforts to imagine a better academic ebook experience, leveraging open standards, interoperability, and community-based open source. Welcome, Rob.
Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to Lainey and to Giovanna for inviting me today to speak to all of you. Also, I want to thank my fellow speakers. Thank you, Hillel, and I look forward to hearing the other presentations. I want to just note that I'm pretty much the opposite of Hillel. He's educated as a librarian and learned technology on the job. I'm an educated technologist, and I've been learning librarianship on the job and libraries on the job. And the Westchester Library Association, I've certainly learned from many of you over the years. I want to thank Terry Kirchner and the Westchester Library System, all that I've learned from WLS. Certainly want to thank the Eastchester Public Library, our director, Tracy Wright, and her staff. Tracy and her staff exemplify a great public service, certainly in this last year during the COVID crisis. If you want to look, if any industry wants to look at great customer service, I would just say start with looking at public libraries, because you all are amazing in how you approach public service, and also what you do as librarians to serve the community in accessing information. And finally, I just want to thank, shout out to Jim Neal, my former boss and university librarian, and who happened to write many years ago an article called "Raised by Wolves." I'll have a web link sprinkled throughout the slide deck, and I can share my PDF out with you if you want to look at these links later on. But his article was "Raised by Wolves, the New Generation of Feral Professionals in the Academic Library." Again, I'm a non-library professional in the library world. And when he wrote this article, "Raised by Wolves," I said to Jim, you called me a dog. But I joke with Jim that I'm his #1 feral professional. So here we are, it's 2021, and I'd like to talk a little bit about technology, but in the context of a couple of themes. Now, you might call these themes best practices. I'll just call them 4 topics. And the 4 topics I'd like to talk about are, first, the library is the brand. Second, that open supports sustainability. Third, collaboration makes a difference. And 4, and I think public libraries exemplify collaboration as well, certainly in Westchester. And 4, you don't need to dominate the market in order to influence it. So let's get started. Columbia University Libraries and Columbia University as a whole, Columbia, of course, founded in 1754. Our focus is on supporting research, teaching, and learning. There are about 30,000 plus students at Columbia, 9,000 undergraduates. So we actually have more graduate students than undergraduates at Columbia. We have over 4,000 faculty members. We have 18 schools and countless institutes and centers. A $5 billion budget, and it's basically split evenly between tuition, research, clinical care, certainly in this past year with COVID treatment, therapeutics, and now the vaccine, a huge part of what we do, and our investments. So just give you a sense of how Columbia breaks down and how the libraries serve that community. We have over 300 full-time staff members. 40% of us are non-librarian professionals. So I'm a non-librarian professional in a library world. We have 13 million volumes, 160,000 journals, 600 million articles, countless resources. And our strategic directions are summarized in our strategic directions document, which I welcome you to take a look at it. Let's just see what happened here. So the first question, the library is the brand. Does branding matter? And why am I talking about this in the era of technology and best practices around technology? Well, branding by definition is a practice by which we use a name or symbol or design that's easily identifiable, that helps to identify that company. As this article describes, it's critical for a business, and it helps how people perceive that business or that entity's brand and its perception. So let's do a little experiment here. I'm going to pop up some icons and brands, and you can pop into your chat some of you if you can guess what these are. This should be pretty straightforward, but what the heck, let's do it. Let's see how it flies. Here we go. So if you put into the chat, what do you see? Anybody? Come on, there's a participation. Let's see what we have here. All right. Somebody said Nike, someone said NYPL, Target, Twitter, Apple, McDonald's, Columbia. All right, looks like we got it all. Okay, so thank you for participating. All right, keep going, it's good, it's good. So when I look at some of these icons, I see certain things. When you look at these icons, do you see a red circle, or do you think about going shopping at Target? When you look at the golden arches, do you see just some gold markers, or do you start thinking about, ooh, I could go for a Big Mac or a McMuffin, or maybe get some coffee? You know, all of you with your computers and laptops and phones using, you look at the Apple logo, you look at your phone, you're connected and you're perceiving the value of those corporations based on the branding. The branding evokes something. And so this is something that we see as important. Thank you for playing along. So does branding matter? That's an interesting question. And why in libraries do we use branding? Well, at Columbia, I took a look at this a few years back, and I took a look at some of the vendors who provide electronic resources to us, and we were spending about $3 million a year for these 6 major vendors. And what I noticed, and what we noticed, is that the library presence and branding on those pages was either minimal or non-existent. The corporate brand, the branding of the product was prominent. We didn't exist. And worse, some of these e-resource vendors actually put where our brand should have been advertising that was contrary to our values. One of them went so far as to put an advertisement for an alternative university, for a competitive university, on top of something we were licensing to put in front of our students and faculty. So that was very disturbing. And you know, the challenge is the lack of visibility of the brand means that people might not perceive the libraries as providing that resource or service. And it could affect our ability to secure resources, which means money, which means funding. So I asked the question, looking at this, is why did libraries give away our branding? Now, this might be less of an issue for public libraries, but this is something that many of my academic library colleagues noticed as well, that many of these vendor products put their corporate brand or their service brand or their product name in front of, or often displacing completely the brand of the library. So let's take a look at an example. This is EBSCO, you know, not picking on one, but this is a very big vendor of ours. And you can see the EBSCO logo on the left and EBSCO host on the left as a service. And on the very right, if you look in very little small, you might see Columbia University Libraries. And this is what we meant by minimal or non-existent. Some of the vendors would put them in headers, very, very small, or footers at the bottom in a kind of a grayed out color. You could barely see it. So we worked with these vendors to change it. This was before, and this was after, right? So prominent top level branding of the Columbia University Libraries, as well as our iconography, which is actually, what we've now done across many of our vendor platforms. So this was an effort that we did, and we declare that branding matters. And we have created a guide for our vendors. Many of these vendors are technology vendors. They are electronic resource vendors. They are distributing content to us, but as you know, you cannot distribute content in the electronic age without the technology, without the platform, without the readers. And they were assuming certain levels of ownership of those platforms that, in fact, I don't think they had the right to do so. I think that the library had to be prominent. And so we also developed a collections development policy that's stated here. Library branding is more important than the vendor or publisher's corporate brands. And our continued funding hinges on the following branding characteristics, practices, and principles. In other words, if you're a vendor and you like to get paid by us, you had to adhere to this, because our ability to secure funding relies on our students and our faculty and our administration to recognize that these services are provided by us and not just free to the internet. And so this was an effort that we worked on a few years back. Branding matters. And I wrote an article about this in the Scholarly Kitchen called "The Library is the Brand." I think I said this in a fit of exasperation one day in a meeting, that the library is the brand. And my staff all laughed at me, and we turned it into a kind of a rallying cry for our efforts. Columbia University Libraries, the library is the brand. And I welcome you to read the article and to learn a bit more about what we discovered along the way. Okay, so the second topic is open supports sustainability. So let's dig into this a little bit. What is sustainability? Well, the American Library Association defines sustainability as the use and stewardship of resources today that preserves them for tomorrow. And it defines three components to sustainability: economy, ecology, and equity. So when we look at sustainability, we could think about it with this lens that is in fact defined by our library community. Open, free to access, use, modify, and share. Why does this matter? Well, we want to ensure that the content, the technology, and the service can be sustained, and open can foster sustainability by avoiding traps that might impede economy, ecology, and equity. We want to avoid vendors, for example, that might create proprietary approaches that might lock us into a particular approach and impede economy, ecology, and equity. We want to also support bibliodiversity, which is the ability for our community to publish across a very wide range, the international community of publishers and authors, to be able to get their information out to potential readers. And by keeping an open platform, an open approach for content, technology, and services, we can minimize conservation and preservation. We can deal with remediation and mitigate and reduce migration costs when we have to migrate from one format to another. Now, open source is a particular category, and Hillel talked about it a little bit regarding open source software. It's made by many people and distributed under some type of open source license, which grants all people the right to use and modify and change that software. And this software freedom, we think, is foundational to enabling community development of products that can benefit us all using open source software. I worked with a community and a grant that was funded by the Institute for Museum and Library Services and spearheaded by Lyrasis, called "It Takes a Village: Open Source Sustainability." And we created a guidebook for open source efforts that works around the idea that to sustain an open source project, there are four facets that the community needs to understand and work with. One of them is the governance. The second one is community engagement. The third is resource. And the fourth, and not the most significant one, is technology. That the technology is part of these four facets. And there are three phases to projects: when you get started, when you're in a period of growth, and when you reached stability, where you're stable but not static. And so we are now engaging in a second grant for It Takes a Village, open source sustainability, to work on specific ways we can support projects. And that's a $242,000 grant from IMLS to continue our efforts. And again, there's a link there to this document that we wrote. But there is more than just open source. And we've discussed in the community multiple opens. I've mentioned 5 opens. There are probably more than 5 opens. Open content, the ability to access and reuse content. Certainly in scholarship, that's important. Open source, again, open source software, which is documented and reusable, as Hillel mentioned, putting into GitHubs and sharing freely. Open formats to facilitate the use and migration from one structure to another, from one format to another over time. Open protocols, the ability to exchange information between machines and systems across networks. And open community, one that is diverse, representative, and inclusive. And So these are things that we think are important. I gave a presentation at LPub in 2019, and there's a whole presentation on open approach to support sustainability. I'll give you one specific example of how we're doing this at Columbia, and that's related to search and discovery, our front end, as it were, the interface for finding things at Columbia's collections. First of all, our catalog itself, the metadata itself, we've made open. So open content. We have published, and you can download today all of our metadata, well, most of our metadata, except that which might have license restrictions, to your own computer, and you can take a look at our MARC metadata, and it's available there as our open Clio data project. Clio is the name of our catalog. We use open source. We use products like Blacklight and Solar MARC and many more related open projects that help support our platform. We use the open format, the MARC metadata standard. It's an open standard for documenting how we describe our collections. We use open protocols that can allow machines to communicate with each other and applications to communicate with each other. For example, Solar, the Solar backend, which is an Apache project out there on the internet, and we can use that as a way to connect front-end systems to back-end systems. And the open community. So the open community, Blacklight Samvera, is a pretty big community. And so this is just a photograph, and I might be in there somewhere, but certainly some of my staff are there. It's a project that supports discovery. So it's an open source discovery platform framework. It's community-based, and there are over 100 organizations and over 400 contributors to this project. And you can see, just as an example of how we work together to try to bring this project to fruition. This is kind of a fun one because you can see no masks, right? You can see this is a few years ago. And there's a history of Blacklight presentation that I've given that's linked down below. So we use Blacklight for unified discovery, and this is a Blacklight interface. We use Blacklight for our institutional repository, helping faculty and students submit materials, including dissertations, for worldwide access. This is also Blacklight. And we also use Blacklight for our digital library collections. This is our digital preservation front end, as it were, to all of our digital materials that we have. Third, collaboration makes a difference. So the libraries, as we know, are part of a much larger information ecosystem, and I would contend that no library is actually special or can go it alone anymore, given the size of this information ecosystem. But what we can use is collaboration to drive innovation, to develop new services, to spread the risk, and to foster sustainability. It requires staff time, it requires relationship building, it requires partnership, and it requires long-term commitment. Certainly WLS and WLA, you've been doing this since 1938, you understand and have worked to collaborate and share over many decades. Columbia engages in many, many projects at scale. These are just kind of the brands of some of the things we work on. Bar Direct among 13 Ivy Plus institutions for resource sharing, print holding sharings, Fedora, Vivo, Lyrasis. The Muslim World Manuscripts, very exciting. We're working with the University of Pennsylvania and the Free Library of Philadelphia to digitize Muslim manuscripts and put them online, and Archive Space and other projects. One particular effort, ReCap, is our collaborative effort to build an off-site shelving facility in Princeton, New Jersey. It's a collaboration between Princeton, New York Public Library, Columbia, and now Harvard to manage and safely store our materials in a environmentally controlled warehouse that has staff and can maintain these materials at the right conditions over time, with item delivery to the campuses as well as electronic document delivery. We're working on a $750,000 Mellon-funded effort to improve the software to actually refactor it to include Harvard's collections, which is coming up soon, and to integrate their offsite depository. So actually we'll have an offsite depository in Princeton as part of ReCap, and then Harvard's depository will have 2 depositories that will provide books and materials to the 4 institutions. The end result essentially is to put those materials in front of our users. And here you can see in our Clio catalog that today we have 2.5 million items available from New York Public Library for our users to see, thanks to this collaboration. Another 2.3 million from Princeton. I noticed at Hati Trust, we have another 1.6 million there, but soon we'll be getting Harvard's collection as well. And we're definitely looking forward to adding the millions of items to Harvard, from Harvard into Columbia's collection. And this is very exciting. And then finally, and this is kind of an interesting one that maybe I'm aspirational here, which is that you don't need to dominate the market in order to influence it. Now, what do we mean by that? What do you mean by dominate and market and influence? We're libraries, right? We're just a small part of the trillion-dollar, multi-trillion-dollar information technology world. But I would contend that libraries are trusted partners in the communities, in the country, and in the world. And that our skills and what we bring are important more so than ever today. Look for trusted partners, neutral partners in providing information to our constituents that we serve. And we can influence the broader library and technology market. And as Hillel mentioned, we want to foster that with our going back to our core library values. And I include the link to the core values of librarianship. Again, I'm not a librarian, but I play one on TV. I read these. These are really very important for us to engage in efforts that foster sustainable access and preservation of our collections and services that we can provide to our community. So I'm working on a project to imagine a better academic ebook, imagine a better academic ebook experience. The goal here is not to just provide a product or a service, but actually let's transform the academic ebook ecosystem. And let's use open approaches that foster sustainability of that ecosystem, collaborating with local, national, and international partners. I have a few presentations here. Luckily for the academic libraries, the public libraries are leading the way with programs like the Readers First Initiative and Simply E coming from New York Public Library, the Digital Public Library of America, Connecticut State and many other states, and consortium organizations like Lyrasis and Amigos in the Southwest and Minitex that are all coming together, and Khalifa. So as readers increasingly turn to ebooks, libraries have a responsibility to provide them with the same open, easy, and vital access to content that they have with physical books. That's the Readers First mandate. And this is great. We don't have to invent anything in the academics. We can follow the lead of publics. So there are millions of dollars being spent to help transition to an open ebook ecosystem funded by our federal tax dollars through IMLS, with funding from Mellon and with funding from Sloan to actually move the ecosystem forward, to actually increase and transform the market, and actually grow the market for ebooks. So at Columbia, our goal is to launch Simply E this spring. We're actually right on the verge of launching Simply E for Columbia, with a goal of having 1 million of our ebooks in Simply E by December 2022. We're working with Lyrasis and other partners to get this used by Columbia, but also by other academic libraries to really grow this. How can we get this to be used by 1,000 academic libraries across the country? And to engage the ebook providers, to tell those ebook providers, where we buy the books from them, that this is actually going to help grow the market, because we'll have more people reading books and using the collections, and actually make it easier for them because they won't have to build as much of this technology themselves. They can leverage what we're doing with an open technology framework. So in summary, the library is the brand, open supports sustainability, collaboration makes a difference, and you don't need to dominate the market in order to influence it. I look forward to discussing many of these with you and other items of discussion after the break. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was fascinating. And Anthony Reda will be introducing our next speaker.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. And Mr. Cartolano, that thank you. And good morning, everyone. And Mr. Cartolano, that presentation was fantastic as someone who works for an academic library. So I definitely have a lot of questions later on. But I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Lisa Kropp. Lisa Kropp is the director of the Lindenhurst Memorial Library, which became the 3rd library in the United States to achieve sustainable library certifications under the NILA Sustainable Libraries Initiative. In October of 2019, she successfully posed a $9.9 million renovation and expansion project to the community. Construction is scheduled to begin in June of this year. She was formerly the Youth Services Coordinator for the Suffolk Cooperative Library System, where she specialized in promoting and advocating for early learning programs in libraries. She's an assistant adjunct professor for St. John's University in the Department of Library and Information Science, focusing on youth services, coursework, customer service, and sustainability in libraries. When she isn't working, you can find her at the beach, in a garden, or training her puppy in agility coursework. Everyone, welcome Lisa Kropp.
Thank you. And I'm assuming everyone can see what is a picture of what my brain looked like in March of 2020. So thank you to Giovanna and the Westchester Library Association for inviting me to share our story. I was going to start off by complaining about the 18 inches of snow on the ground here, but then on the news I saw that West Harrison, New York beat us with 24 inches. So it just reminds me that it's all about perspective. So like almost every single library in New York State, we wound up closing to the public on March 15th. My board meeting happens to be on Saturdays. So March 14th, we had a board meeting, and pretty much this pile of yarn was my head, my board members' heads. We really weren't prepared for this. You know, no matter what anyone says, when we were prepared to close for maybe a couple of weeks. We've had to do that before. New HVAC, sure, we have to close to the public for a couple of weeks. But this quickly turned into something very, very different, right? Where it was 2 weeks, another week, another week, another week. And it was very hard to pace and figure out how to transition services to the community. So today, luckily, I think that I'm amazed at what my staff was able to accomplish. And we do look a little bit more organized, like the picture on the right side of the screen. And for us, besides the people, and I'm so glad that I got to hear Robert and Hillel first talk, because Hillel's example of that technology triangle, for a public library, it's really the people. It's the people and it's the connections, but we wouldn't have been able to do what we did in 2020 if it wasn't for using technology to transform our physical space into a virtual space. And hold on a second, because there we go. My arrows are not working. Okay, so in order to do something, right? What's one of the first things that you need to get to point A, from point A to point B? Or what are the first 5 things you need? You need to have some level of infrastructure, right? So you don't go from nothing to having something as organized and complex looking as what's on the screen right now. So we had a circulation system, right? We had mobile Sierra, we had email, our website, we had limited social media success with interacting with patrons. But what we realized is we really, really needed to increase our technology game, our hardware and our software to effectively transition a physical building into virtual services that were meeting the needs of our patrons. So let's take a minute to talk about strengths and weaknesses. We all have them. We all need to know what our strengths and weaknesses are. As a leader, I need to be able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of my staff. And that's not critical of my staff. That helps me provide better services to the community, right? Because if I have someone who is not well versed in technology, am I going to make that person the head of my technology department? No. But in this instance, when COVID forced us all to close suddenly, what it really did, unfortunately, I think for public libraries is, you know, when you're in a physical building, you oftentimes have somebody sitting next to you at a reference desk, right? So if you're not comfortable with getting that ebook from Overdrive onto somebody's phone or their tablet or their computer, chances are you had somebody sitting next to you, a colleague who'd be like, oh, I got it. I can show this person how to do that. Well, when we went virtual and everyone was stuck in their houses alone, we took away the comfort level of a lot of our employees, unfortunately, because they couldn't rely on each other in that sense of having an immediate backup. So one of the things that we had to do with our technology is really get staff up and running quickly. So luckily for us in 2018, we had hired, the board of trustees realized we needed to have that network person, right? I do not speak technology language. And so they allowed me first, which I am very grateful for, to hire as a consultant a network administrator that I had previously worked at another public library who I admire greatly, James Matias at Middle Country Public Library. He speaks technology, right? I speak human resources and more people language. And together we interviewed for a network and systems specialist for Lindenhurst. And so if I didn't have that person already in place, we would have been in far greater trouble in 2020. So that having Brett, our new network and systems specialist, is what turned this into a happy story for us, because otherwise it really, really would have been a very difficult haul to get from point A to point B. So Brett is a rare breed because he is super smart and he is a total expert in technology, but he also speaks library language, even though he's not a librarian and he never worked in a library before. So he had no background knowledge of our circulation systems, what software we used, how we interacted, and that actually turned out to be a strength because he could see what was missing, he could take what we already have and help staff move forward. So having him there really helped get us up and running in that middle of March to middle of April, which is when we kind of realized this isn't going away. We're going to be doing this for a while, right? I didn't open my building up again to the public until July. And we needed to provide some level of service during that time. We're funded by taxpayer dollars. I was very well aware and worried, quite frankly, of protecting staff. I had 41 staff members. I wanted to get out of this with 41 staff members, both health-wise and job security-wise. So Brett got us up and running. We started using Microsoft Teams, Outlook 365. He wasn't a fan of Zoom at first because back in March of 2020, there were some issues with Zoom and Zoom bombing and security. And so from his tech standpoint, we started off with WebEx. The board allowed us to purchase laptops. Again, this is something that we didn't have already. So we purchased 36 laptops, which was a big purchase for us to give every staff member technology so that I was providing equal access now to my employees at home, because it wasn't fair to expect somebody, who previously didn't have a computer at home because they worked in a library and they were a single family household. And so owning a computer at home wasn't a priority for them, who had a web camera on their computer at home already, who had a very old computer. So all of these things we needed to really very quickly kind of level the playing field for staff and get this done. So we were able to do some of that. We had some difficulty getting 36 laptops. It sounds like a big number, but when every single school district in New York is also looking to purchase thousands and thousands of laptops, suddenly your order is a baby order. But some of the other things that we did in the meantime was we realized we kind of turned into preschoolers again, I'm going to say again. I'm a former youth services librarian, right? So we started questioning everything and asking why. Why was my Wi-Fi not on 24/7? Right? There was no good answer for that. It was security. Oh, riffraff in the parking lot. Don't we have security cameras so that if, a lot of our policies, I think, in defense in public libraries sometimes come from a reactive place of either the one bad thing that happened to you 20 years ago or the what if scenario, fear factor for libraries. And we said, we can't do this, right? We have a good contingency of our population in Lindenhurst who come to the library to use our public computers, to use our Wi-Fi. We just took all of that away from them. So Brett, again, moved routers physically to get them closer to the front of our building. We found out in the meantime, the things that you just don't question again as a library director, right? Do I have Wi-Fi? Yes. Is it working? Yes. Well, guess what? It was a residential network. So when it worked prior to 2020, but in 2020, when everyone was working from home and their children were home and they were doing college from home, suddenly bandwidth was in great demand. So we needed to spend money again and switch over to where we should have been correctly, a commercial network with far greater bandwidth and speed. But we saw overnight a lot of people and throughout the day while we were closed in our parking lot, sitting in front of the building using the Wi-Fi. We loaned some of our Wi-Fi hotspots to the local school district. The school district had originally done a survey asking families, do you have technology at home? And they answered yes. And then those families realized, well, I have technology, but now I have 4 people or 5 people or more all using that in our house. It's not enough. And so we did some long-term loaning of hotspots to help people as well. So what this did for us, sorry, I'm having trouble getting my slides over, is we were able to put put technology into staff's laps, right? The problem with that was that I had some staff that weren't as comfortable using technology. So I started referring to this time period with them. We were doing weekly staff meetings using WebEx so that we could see each other. And I said to them, look, this is like surgery without anesthesia, right? It's painful, it hurts. And I had to acknowledge that, because what COVID took away from me as a library leader was time. I didn't have the essence of time to either say, okay, I can wait until John shows up at work and he can take care of this problem from this morning, because the people that were there this morning couldn't do it. Everything became much, much faster and quicker. And so staff kind of went on a rocket ship of sorts and had to really up their game, their technology game, super fast. So, I mean, that was difficult. And I think that some staff felt like there was a spotlight on them, and they were wonderful at helping each other. And they started using Teams together and then starting Slack channels to talk and using their cell phones to text each other back and forth. We added in a chat reference during this time. So again, I felt like my library was a little behind technology because we weren't comfortable. Just when people aren't comfortable using it, we didn't force it. COVID again kind of forced the issue where our building was closed and we couldn't answer our phones. So I needed to add a chat reference feature to the website. So Brett put Talk reference on there, which is a free software that we were able to use. And staff started practicing with each other, and I would get copies of every single transcript. And so I would see every now and then these transcripts pop up of, hi, it's Peter, I'm just trying it out. Thanks, Janine. And they were talking and going back and forth and getting comfortable with the technology, which is what they needed to do. Because really when we found ourselves by mid-April, I would say is when we realized, or I realized, we're in a marathon. We're not running a 5K. I thought we were running a 5K in March. So we were all like, getting our best mileage time in, and you start burning out, right? You're working. The bad part of technology and working from home is I felt like I had to be on all the time. And I think some of my staff felt the same way. I have to answer immediately. And so we had to step back a little too and tell people you are allowed to take breaks at home. You are allowed to have a lunch break. You're allowed to not answer email after hours. And at the same time that we were doing all of that, we were saying, but we also have to do more, and we have to add more technology in. And how are we going to reach out to our patrons? The readers found the ebooks. Our ebook circulation increased 35% from 2019 to 2020. Suffolk County as a consortium orders our ebooks together. And this year we broke 2 million circulation checkouts of ebooks using Overdrive and Libby. So that wasn't an issue. It was, again, those interactions, those one-on-one communications with people. So one of the things that we started was 2 staff blogs. Again, this was something that one person previously had done. And I forget if Hillel or Robert had said this, but you can't have one technology person for your entire building in terms of your librarians, right? Brett's different. He's the behind the scenes back end guy that makes everything work. I needed every librarian to be a technology user. So previously it was more, this is my comfort level. I'm going to start a blog about cooking because I order the cookbooks and I like to cook at home. Now I needed something that was more cohesive. So our adult services department started a blog called Between the Shelves, because we all like library puns. And the youth services started a blog called Check Us Out. And what it did was it allowed staff to find their own voice virtually, because I basically said, everybody is a writer, everybody has to provide some original content, and these blogs acted as our playground of sorts to get staff to the next level and step, which was online content and interacting live with patrons online some way. So using the blogs in that capacity helped people focus on the areas that they ordered, areas that they had hobbies or expertise in. I mean, you could tell from the blog posts who was writing amongst the staff when you knew who was who. So it helped them identify themselves and find their authenticity in a virtual format, which I think really gave them some gumption to go forward. So social media. Social media is also, I think, a thorn in the side for some public libraries. We have over 9,000 followers of our Facebook page, which is a lot for a library of our size. I think we have the second highest number of followers in Suffolk County. East Hampton Library beat us a few years ago. Before I was director, the 2 directors at the time had a bit of a competition going to see who would get the more likes on their social media page. But again, if you don't have social media accounts in your personal life and you don't use it regularly, it's difficult to understand how to use it effectively now as a library worker and how to use it as a way to communicate. Did this also show disparities between different populations of my librarians in terms of age demographics? Probably. So we had to, again, try a lot of things in April, May, June, July. It was kind of that surgery without anesthesia time was throwing things at the wall. And does this stick? Does it? And pivoting quickly. Okay, this didn't work, but this did. Let's try this. Let's try that. So one of the things that we did was we started a Facebook group attached to our library page called the Conversation Club. In April of 2020, we had planned a whole, we completely stole this, by the way, from Princeton Public Library, so I have to give credit to where it's due. We were going to do an environmental film festival using Canopy, which was a new service for us that has fabulous film documentaries that our patrons could download. And we were planning in-person film discussions until our building closed. So I challenged the staff and said, well, if you were gonna, what's the difference between running that film discussion online versus in person, right? People can still watch the movie at home on Canopy. And using the Conversation Club on Facebook, you could, during a set hour of time that we advertise, pose questions, and maybe people will answer during that live hour, but then it's also going to show up in their news feeds, and you might get comments a couple of days later. And this is how we start to slowly build interaction with people, right? We had limited success with this because, again, some staff had personal accounts. They were comfortable. You know, I'm very branded on Facebook. I have patrons that would friend me, staff that would, had reached out before I got there and friended me. So I was comfortable interacting as Lisa Kropp on a library page. Here comes the puppy. Other library workers weren't as comfortable being themselves. And I totally had to acknowledge that, and that was okay. You can't force somebody who has a personal Facebook account to suddenly say, well, I'm going to use that account and speak on behalf of the library. So we created a persona, LML programs, that staff could log in and out of and identify themselves under that account. You know, like, hi, this is Lisa from the children's department. I'm going to talk today about blah, blah, blah. And again, it worked a little bit, but it wasn't, we did get some of those environmental film discussions going, but not to the extent I think that we were hoping to do. Behind the scenes, while we're doing all of this, we also are looking at what other channels do we have. The previous director prior to me was very big in content creation, and he would spend hours making his own animated videos, and they were on a YouTube channel for the library that when he retired, we unfortunately lost access to that account. So one thing I learned through all of this is do not use personal email accounts when you're creating library-based accounts. We started making a lot of generic email accounts so that we could, you know, have circulation at lindenhurstlibrary.org. So we always had, Brett had access to everything. And so if, as people changed or got promoted or moved on, we didn't lose all that content. So we had to create a new YouTube channel, which is now branded. Thank you for talking about branding, Robert, with this new logo that we had on everything. So it was identifiable. And I said to staff, you know, we can do story times online. We can do some of our other programs, craft programs and things online. Again, it was a comfort level in getting people comfortable using technology in new ways. So some staff asked, you know, we gave them access to Filmora, which is a video editing software. They were using iMovies for a while on their phones. Again, people were at home. They were using their iPhones to tape themselves and create content. One of the examples that I love is one of the adult librarians. Again, she loves cooking. We miss her food in the fact that we can't share food so much right now, but she doesn't like to be on camera. So she taught herself, she took gorgeous photos in her kitchen of the different steps of her making banana bread. And then she learned how to take all those still images and create a video and have the recipe on there. And that video has a few hundred views. One of our youth services librarians, the head of youth services, asked staff, you know, we saw other libraries, what are other public libraries doing right now to engage with their patrons? And they were making videos just acknowledging we're closed, we miss you. So in April for National Pet Day, we asked staff who had pets, you know, can you send us a little 10, 20-second video clip? Or if you don't want to do a video clip, can you send us a photo of yourself holding a sign or something saying, I miss you? And we pieced those all together and came up with like a 3.5-minute video that got over 800 views that we were able to share on social media, just saying to our patrons, we acknowledge how difficult this is for you too. We miss seeing you in the building. And the videos started to grow. So to date, we have over 160 videos on YouTube. You can tell from some of these little clips here of this screenshot that our staff really, really ran with this. Talking about branding, I had a part-time Paige, she was a Paige. She graduated with an associate's degree in graphic design. I said to the board, you know, it's a tough time to be hiring anybody, but we need somebody, I don't know graphic design. You know, that's one thing that librarians, we try to do everything instead of sometimes sourcing it out. There's a big, big difference between what I can do with a flyer and what Lynn can do with a flyer using Canva and some of these other tools. So we promoted her to a part-time clerk, and she works one shift on the circulation desk. Primarily her hours are spent providing content and creating content for us. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But we started coming up with beginning slides, ending slides that had our branding on it, that listed our website, our different social media channels. And this was at the start and end of every single video we did, so that we were branded and people could tell it came from us. Again, as a director, I'm so grateful to my staff that rose to the challenge and that did these things in their home when their babies were climbing all over them, trying to take the puppets away, when their pets were interrupting them. One of our patrons emailed me to say how grateful she was that her grandson could watch Miss Justine and Miss Gina on Facebook Live, and then we transitioned it over to YouTube, and see faces that he knew from coming to Storytime. And to him, that made his new world, right, this new normal, comforting and seem okay, because even though the library was closed, he could still see Miss Justine. So we kind of ruined the whole stereotype that teachers and librarians live in the school and the libraries, right? Because now here we were inviting everyone into our houses, but I think it made us more human for people too, and that they appreciated the lengths that the public library was going to try to stay open with them. One of the things that we also did with YouTube and with our Facebook channel is we started using two different softwares, Be Live and StreamYard. We now only use StreamYard. It's much easier for us, but we did that as staff got more comfortable going live. We both booked programmers and paid for content. So we had some happy hours you'll see on here where we would turn our Facebook Live over to a programmer, and they were doing happy hour music concerts. People miss music. So giving them an opportunity to hear live music on Facebook Live or on the YouTube channel, we found was getting a couple of thousand views. Sometimes people really were happy with that and approached that. Again, I felt like personally, I needed to walk the walk. So I did a few things myself. I had a snafu while I was interviewing my musician friends live, where my son blew a circuit breaker when he plugged a space heater in, and I went dead and froze. And so for about 10 minutes, we were gone. So, you know, things happen. And again, we got back up and running and people accepted. One of the things I think that was most important for us throughout this whole thing is that throughout we realized we had to finish our social media had to get more interactive. And so we started using Hootsuite to get our posts and our branding up. The Crossroads Cafe is something that's a tough program to do in person, just in terms of getting a lot of people in. And here we now went virtual, and it was shared by a Lindenhurst patron with her friend, and we had someone from Japan join to practice their English. And if we were in a physical building, that wouldn't have been possible. So it was a positive side of social media. So I hope that some of you will come and ask some questions, because I'm sure I forgot half of what I was going to talk about, what we did. But in the end, I just want to leave you with the fact that if things are not done, then they are. If everything is not okay, it's not the end. This is something that I saw at my son's high school graduation, which was virtual. And I think this was our philosophy for the rest of the year. So thank you for letting me speak a little bit about what we did virtually.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing so many wonderful behind the scenes efforts at your library. I took down some ideas. So what do they say? Imitation is the highest form of flattery. So there you have it. So I have the pleasure of introducing our last speaker for this morning. Kathryn Shaughnessy is an associate professor in the St. John's University Libraries. As the open education librarian, Professor Shaughnessy's work focuses on the ethical dimensions of information and communication technologies, ICT, access, and ICT literacy in education/library environments, including facilitating the adoption, adaption, and creation of open scholarship. As co-PI of a National Archives, National Historical Publications and Records Commission grant-funded project titled Family, Immigration and History, Grade 10, Citizen Archivist in the Digital Age. Professor Shaughnessy has worked with New York City public school teachers to develop open curricula involving digital historical records. As a senior Vincentian Center Fellow, she serves as an expert for the Holy See Mission to the United Nations, covering agenda items dealing with ICTs, development, migration, women, and education. Her service to professional library organizations includes serving on the regional executive board of the Greater New York Metropolitan Area of CRL from 2009 to the present, currently as the co-convener of the Open Discussion Group. She also serves on the National Executive Board of the Catholic Library Association, formerly as member at large from 2015 to 2019, and currently as the Vice President, President-elect 2019-2021. Please welcome Kathryn Shaughnessy.
Thank you very much, Giovanna, and thank you all for taking the time and sharing your expertise. I look forward. Thank you very much, Giovanna, and thank you all for taking the time and sharing your expertise. I look forward to sharing more information in and amongst ourselves here. I want to just start and make sure that if you could give me a thumbs up if you can see my presentation, that would be great. Thank you, Robert. All right, thank you, Anthony. I am grateful to the facilitators of this conference and to our previous presenters. I want to start by with a little bit of gratitude. So not only to our co-presenters and to WLA, but I actually I grew up in a library. So even though I have a library degree, my mom was a librarian, and it was right at the age when personal computers were taking hold. So we were fortunate to have a personal computer in our house, and my mom and I would sit there and try and figure out how she could, print out card catalog stuff on our house. So my connection with libraries and technologies is both intellectual and has some affection, given the connection with my mom. I also want to thank our DLIS students and faculty colleagues who have been part of this process of thinking, open community colleagues, all of my history and education and galleries and library colleagues. We are also really fortunate in this area to have Metro and the Empire State Digital Network, and I've been doing some work with DPLA and Queen's Memory. So all of these people and projects have kind of influenced what I'm going to talk about today. I especially want to point out that there's lots of hidden workers who I can't acknowledge, and there's lots of people who have shared their expertise, not because they were IT professionals or library professionals, but because they have lived experience. So the conference theme, when I got the invitation from Lainey and Giovanna, was about new technologies and best practices in libraries and archives. And my background is really in terms of ethics and the use of technology and how technology impacts people. So a few of the thoughts that I had initially was that I would look at the ethics of the best practices and the ethics of the applications of new technologies, to talk a little bit about neutrality and thinking about how, although we think of technology as being deliverers of bits and bytes of information, libraries are not necessarily neutral, technology is not neutral, archives aren't neutral. When we make decisions, those decisions preclude other options. I also kind of was thinking about how when we as librarians and archivists, we are like by nature collaborative. And so how is it that we're using technologies in ways that make that collaboration the best for everybody involved? And how can we be inclusive by design? So there's some things in which we have no input when it comes to design, but there are ways in which the libraries and librarians and archivists can be part of the design process, and we can take advantage of some of the design decisions that have been made. So I was actually really grateful that Hillel brought up values and openness and responsibility in terms of technology. I was very glad to see Robert talking about the values and how whether vendor aligns with our values and not just our branding, but our values, and the 5 kinds of open and the emphasis on collaboration. And I was glad to see Lisa kind of talking about that necessary connection of matching people with expertise. You know, there's some people who talk library, there's some people who talk technology, but ultimately technology is a tool, and we're looking at who the user is and how we're going to help our user. And so in that way, the input by non-librarians into these decisions is really important, but librarians can serve as advocates in roles where decisions are in places where decisions are being made about technology. So we can be the non-tech person in the room talking about the user. So with that in mind, I thought I would just share some of the lessons that I've had as a librarian, as an academic librarian, collaborating with other entities and projects, and some of the things that I discovered and which I hope will be applicable, and feel free to use as you will. So we'll start with ADA compliance, and that was with the Office of Disability Studies, and working with online learning services and grant faculty, that role of OER, and collaborating with IT. We talk a little bit about digital divide and how data is used, and with ACEI, we talk about inclusive planning. So if we're going to include people in our services, when we think about it, one of the best approaches to this is universal design. And universal design was originally designed, and it was a theory that came to the forefront when it came to architecture and how we were going to make buildings and public spaces more broadly accessible to people who had physical handicaps. So universal design was really first in the physical world, and then it moved to the technology world. But the principle of universal design really isn't just about physical things. It's the idea that things should be designed in a way that everybody, the widest possible population, can use it. So it's not just that we create something for a specific population and everybody benefits, but that we create something in a way that everybody can use from the start without the need for additional accommodation. So we know about curb cutouts, and it's not just people who have wheelchairs who benefit from that, but it's also people with strollers. And if you are using a cart for your groceries. Closed captioning was originally developed for people who had who needed assistance with auditory issues, but they have grown. A lot of people uses closed captioning now, and it can be really helpful for English as a second language of folks who are watching movies or lessons, etc. Voice recognition software was originally for people who had mobility issues and typing, but as a lot of folks with an iPhone or a smartphone, you can now dictate things, and you can ask for directions through Siri, etc. And of course, audiobooks were developed for folks who had issues with vision or mobility issues with turning pages. And as we've seen, lots of folks are taking advantage of the benefits of audiobooks. So it moves from the physical environment to the web environment, but the idea is that when it comes to designing for universal ways, you're trying to make it as accessible as possible to the widest possible group of people without needing to constantly make accommodations. So in this case then, how would we go about applying this in the library world and in education environments? And in general, if we're concerned about ADA compliance when we deliver our own services, I would suggest that in addition to just learning about it, that we start with the low-hanging fruit. There are ways that we can look through what it is that we're providing in terms of instruction, in terms of information about our services, and make sure that they are ADA compliant. So the good news is that the ADA laws have been on the books for over 25 years. It's closer to 30 years now. And therefore, when it comes to technology, a lot of these platforms have ADA features built into them, but it doesn't really help unless we enable those features. So when it comes to libraries and technology and including and designing things to be included from the beginning and to appeal to as many users as possible without needing to that extra step of accommodation that'll help, I would suggest getting familiar with the existing tools and the ADA features within them. Microsoft has a very robust accessibility checker. And once you get used to using those features, it can become second nature. I'm happy to go over this a little bit more if you want. And if you want, you can also look at this campus guides on ADA tweaks. The Wave Accessibility Checker for your existing website and for your existing resources, it allows you to kind of do an audit of your library resources to see how accessible maybe your existing web pages are, and it helps you to check the accessibility if you're creating more web pages. I know Lisa mentioned creation of blogs, and if you look at the existing features within the blog software, they're similar to the stuff that's in Microsoft. And then when you enable those features, you can use the Wave Accessibility Checker to check whether that blog entry is accessible or not. And that might include for videos having closed captioning or podcasts having transcripts. Additionally, when you're looking at the tools that you have already, the databases that you have, the platforms that host those databases, you want to check, especially for stuff that you already have, what VPATs are available. But then if you're going to look into adopting a new technology or a new platform, you want to look at what VPATs, which is the voluntary, platform kind of statement that programmers have about how accessible their platforms and programs are. So we can go into greater detail, and if you want more information, you can go to this LibGuide. But just because Microsoft is probably the way that a lot of folks are creating instructional materials and sharing them, I just wanted to bring those to your attention. So if you in Microsoft, if you go to File, Info, Check for Issues, that check accessibility feature is there. And if you, when you click that on the right-hand side, it shows the accessibility checker. And what's nice about this is that built into it, if there are errors, it tells you how to fix those errors. So the accessibility checker tells you about errors, which are things that really need to be addressed if something is going to be accessible. And then warnings, things that might be a problem. The good news is that as you go through, if you make all those changes, then the inspection results could be that there are no accessibility issues found. So that is within Word. And within PowerPoint, most of the same sorts of ways to apply the tools and the styles within allow you to run that accessibility checker in PowerPoint. So the main thing about PowerPoint is that it's often very visually driven. So even at the point of decision point of using PowerPoint, and then what design am I going to use? So when I started to do this, PowerPoint says, hey, do you want to use these beautiful, lovely images? And so the question is, are they decorative or are they essential? Because that is going to make a difference in how they are described in order to meet ADA compliance. So within PowerPoint, because PowerPoint is so visually driven, I've just pointed out the alternative text areas. If you put a picture in a PowerPoint that you really want to provide alternative text, and that you can then use the accessibility checker to make sure not only that the images have alternative text, but also if you use a slide that's not a pre-done template, it's going to ask you how you want this to be read out by the screen reader. So in this case, I've used 2 images and a text box, and so it's saying check the reading order of a slide. And again, to maximize accessibility, you want to not just create a PDF, but export a PDF that is also has this ability to be read by assistive devices. So other considerations, if we're talking about technology and library resources, are you selecting the kinds of video platforms that offer closed captioning? So for instance, Canopy is a video database that has the CC built in. If you have another one, is the VPAT saying that they're working on it? When we chose our meeting software, we had the option of Teams, WebEx, and Zoom. And especially when we're going into COVID, that was essential. And if you're recording, that ability to have CC available auto-captioned as well is helpful. So all of these have that possibility. You need to talk to your IT department about whether they've been enabled, and sometimes it costs a little bit more money. With Teams, it's very easy, it's seamless, and whoever might need it can turn on the closed captioning, and whoever might need it can make the recording. Also note that if you start to put your materials up on YouTube, there is a facet for closed captioning, and to the extent that you make it open, you or your colleagues at the library can clean up the closed captioning, or you can even make it open for language translation. If you're using audio platforms, you want to make sure that the platform can host transcripts. And once again, when we talk about vendor compliance, you want to make sure that the VPAT report indicates how accessible something is and what plans that vendor has to make your resource more accessible. When it comes to collaboration for open, that was with online learning services and working on a grant and working with faculty. So the idea here is that in working with the bookstore and with our Center for Teaching and Learning, there are really good reasons for open and the default to open. So again, I was very glad to see that Hillel and Robert really talked a little bit about the open ecology of information. I feel that as librarians, our job is to take down any existing barriers to information and to help make sure that we are not people who are erecting barriers. So while we could just talk about the technological barriers that exist when we have proprietary information, proprietary resources, there are also economic barriers and legal barriers and information literacy barriers. And we can be advocates to make sure that the decisions that are being made about our technologies in our institutions, our public libraries, our academic libraries, have have this ethos of the open ecology of information in mind. So from a technical point of view, open access makes sure that there's no barriers for indexing. It allows the data to pass through, and that the technical barriers are such that there's interoperable between various different systems and different platforms. So when I advocate for open access in the library and with my community members, I point out that as a researchers, our faculty can keep their copyright, that open access, if there's a zero embargo period, means that that's the dissemination of, critical research. And as we've seen in COVID, that sharing of research and data immediately is really important. That you can share the research data as quickly as possible, and that increasingly grant providers, people who are going to provide money for you to do research and put your research out, are requiring that you release your information articles under CC BY, and that the data is openly available. For those of you who are in academic or public libraries, if you have not yet checked it out, I would suggest that you check out the Directory of Open Access Journals. Not only are these resources that our patrons can use when they're at the library, they can use it, across the world with internet access, and it's the way that you can introduce a global perspective on any topic as well. I would also advocate at our public and academic libraries for open education resources. This really is super important for student success. Open education resources, although they are mostly born digital, they don't necessarily have to be born digital, but they are able to be stored and copied and distributed for zero cost. And really, the Creative Commons license is what allows creators of education resources to be able to share these things in a way that means that they don't have to bring in the legal department to sign up a contract. So Robert had talked about the various different kinds of open. With OER, one of the most important things from a technological point of view is that you're putting it out there in such a way that it can be remixed and remastered using other technologies, and it can be redistributed widely. And really, the importance of open access and OER is that technology is what makes it possible. The ability to create and disseminate information quickly and in a way that bypasses a proprietary publisher is very important, while still maintaining the integrity of the work, because you have experts who are creating the materials and experts who are reviewing them. So if you have not yet already looked into it, in addition to the Directory of Open Access Journals, I would suggest that you look into open access textbooks. And again, that I have some resources on those open resources in the LibGuide. I'm gonna move ahead here just so that I want to be careful of our time. So open technology is more than free, or open access resources are more than free. It's more about the technological barriers, but it also has to do with ADA accessibility and the ability for culturally relative and culturally responsive materials to be made more available to our constituents. I can talk a little bit more in the room about the NHPRC project. The idea here was to not only engage students with digital research and digital literacy skills, but to kind of critically examine the role of technology in the development of digital archives, and whether folks wanted to contribute or not. So there's plenty of resources that already exist. And again, for inclusivity purposes, the idea was that these resources would all be freely available, that they would reflect research from across the globe. So immigration history was not just from the US perspective, but from the global perspective. But then also the tools we used were open. So we used Zotero. Audacity is free, if not open. We ended up using Google Maps because, as Hillel and Robert pointed out, you don't just use the new thing. So we could have used open maps, but the learning curve on that was very high, and most of the New York City school teachers already use Google Classrooms. So to that extent, we used Google Maps because it was free rather than the open version. A JS Timeline from the Knight Foundation was a free timeline producer. And the idea of students being able to contribute through technology from afar, that they would be able to help the National Archives describe with the descriptive metadata. So here, students could contribute via National Archives, Queen's Memory, and then the faculty contributed their projects through OER Commons, again, with the open ethos of information involved there. Things that came out of that were considerations of copyright. So we were able to have the students kind of understand the notion of intellectual property, what copyright meant, what open meant, and cultural considerations within archives. So there are gaps in archival collection. Why are those gaps there? Are there some things that should not be included? Are there some things that should be included, but then have these traditional knowledge labels, kind of putting parameters on how they should be reused? And finally, a little bit about regret from that project, which is when we talk about this open ecology of information and sharing information widely, once you've decided to upload something, does the technology platform or does the project allow for you to withdraw that contribution? So in the same way that we've seen stories about the right to be forgotten in Google, this is a kind of a right to be forgotten within open access archives. Finally, very quickly, when it comes to collaboration with IT, and in our case, the academic task force, when it came to COVID, we wanted to make sure that what we were requiring of students and of faculty took the digital divide into consideration. Lisa touched on this a little bit. It's so faculty, staff, and students all had varying levels of being affected by the digital divide. Also, to the extent that we were asking students to be subject to software, how was data being collected about the students, how is it being used, and who has the authority to access it? And specifically, when it came to proctoring software, there was an inequity because, as Lisa mentioned, not everyone has a camera, but additionally, there are problems with how the proctoring software registers the face of students of color. And plagiarism software really kind of is built on the premise of taking the intellectual property of students. And finally, collaboration with our Academic Center for Equity and Inclusion. When you're looking at technology, who does the technology include? Who does it exclude? Is it built in to that technology that somebody's excluded? Does it marginalize people? And what processes and policies are throwing up obstacles to prevent participation? So I guess all of this came to, when it comes to new technologies or any technologies and the best practices and policies that we're going to erect around them, let's make sure that we're making them user-centered and that we're including all the different kinds of users or excluding them if they wish to be excluded. So if you are in the room when IT and data-driven administrators are saying we have to use this software, how is it going to impact the students in terms of privacy and equity? When we're talking about open access journals or e-textbooks, if we use print textbooks, there's an inequity, but if we use e-textbooks, are we going to use open proprietary? Is the library going to be in violation of copyright? if we use inclusive access models, do the students have to opt out, or could we make them such that they could opt in? So I'm happy to talk about any of these things in more depth in the Q&A, but just wanted to make sure that you all knew that I was walking the walk. This presentation will be available under CC BY, and I did use some of the wording from the Creative Commons certificate in the open part of the presentation. So thank you for your time and attention, and looking forward to meeting again after the break.
Thank you so much. You touched on so many aspects of equity, inclusion, accessibility. I want to sign up for a class now to refresh on all of this. It's 11:06. We're back. We'll wait for everyone. Hopefully everyone's back. So we do ask that you use the chat box to type in questions, but obviously if you would like to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that as well. Give you a few seconds to gather your thoughts. We had so much food for thought actually this morning. I know there was a question, I think it was either during Hillel's or Rob's presentation about additional periodicals. Would they be available on ebooks or as ebooks?
Sure, I think that was about maybe Simply E. So in terms of building an open technology ecosystem, the idea is not to limit it based on what people want to do or what the business model is, but let the individual institutions decide. So EPUB and PDF and audiobooks are supported today through what we're doing. So if the journal, periodical, or other literature comes in a PDF or EPUB format, it could be distributed that way. So it's really more of a choice as opposed to a kind of a closely coupled decision about content and platform.
Sarah has a question. Wouldn't that be up to the teachers? I guess in terms of what's made available.
Could you clarify a little bit your question?
Yes, Sarah, could you clarify?
Hi, what I'm really curious about is, has there been any talk with textbook publishers to provide their writings in a comparable format when the authors of the textbooks produce their content? Couldn't they also create content for an ebook that's more engaging for the student?
I may turn over to Kathryn to answer this a bit more, but I think the key is that today the business model, the technology, and the content are tightly coupled in certain types of textbook publishing areas. And as a result, choice is limited, technology is more complex than it needs to be, usability is not so good. So if we start to look at this the way the web browser changed the internet, right? Prior to the web browser, you had multiple different ways to get information off the internet, but the web browser became the dashboard, a common dashboard to get information across many, many different publishers, free, licensed, this effort really underway is to kind of change that a little bit and to hide from the students and the teachers some of these decisions. So whether you license a book from one vendor or a different vendor, whether it's an open access textbook, the users shouldn't have to see all the underlying mechanics. And today they do. And I think that's problematic. Kathryn, I'm sure you can share your thoughts, because you sound, this work you're doing is absolutely fabulous.
Well, I'm actually really glad. So we talked a little bit before about the technology, the person who speaks technology and the person who speaks librarianship, and Robert is 100% right. What both technologists and librarians have always had in common is that we're trying to make ourselves invisible. You're just trying to make the experience for the user as seamless as possible. So from the point of view of Simply E, what they're trying to do is make it a one-stop shopping. And then when you have a federated search interface, you're trying to make sure that if the person types in what they're interested in, they could pull up the proprietary EBSCO article or journal article and the open access article at the same time in the same way. And the user doesn't necessarily have to know the difference. But what was interesting is that when you were talking about branding and the importance of branding for finances, I'm in the position where, because as a librarian, talking to academics and talking to administrators, when they say, well, I can just get everything, can't I? And they can't tell what we've paid money to an outside person for and what we've paid to develop in-house or what we've paid to be part of a consortium that is building open things. So it kind of works a little bit both ways, right? So when I'm sorry, I missed who asked the question, but the idea here is that as the library is trying to provide books, it could be ebooks, it could be textbooks, but as Robert said, the textbook market, because they are driven by making a profit and with proprietary, closed systems, they only license to individuals, they don't license to libraries. So if I have an economics professor who wants to use an economics textbook that costs $200, they have to go to the bookstore to get that. And each individual student has to pay $200. If the library could pay $2,000 and have 100 students use that textbook, we might be willing to do that. We might be able to ask the provost for money for that, but the textbook providers won't license it to a library. They will only license it to an individual. So when the person who writes the textbook, the economics textbook, for instance, they could either work with a publisher who says, well, I will get it distributed through EBSCO, I'll get it distributed through bookstores or whatever. The publisher says, I will help distribute it for you. I will help the peer review process. But really the people doing the work are the person writing the textbook and the people peer reviewing the textbook. So what librarians and people who work in libraries and know the technology behind this are saying is the technology exists to build this open textbook. The technology exists to automate the peer review process amongst the people who are already doing peer review. And the technology exists to store and distribute this through our open repositories. So university, you can spend money on helping this open infrastructure and paying the economics professor to create an open version of a textbook, which could then be ADA compliant, and it could be culturally responsive. It could be factually responsive. Instead of spending money on a proprietary platform to have them redistribute it and to have us pay the professor and then pay the publisher and then pay a licensing fee. So you're right, it does depend on the teacher. If the teacher wants to license their thing through only a textbook publisher or a monograph publisher, or if in this kind of mindset of I want my research to be distributed widely and used widely and cited widely, maybe if I did this in an open way, it would be more widely cited and more widely distributed and have broader influence. So it is up to the teacher, but it also they have to work within economic models. They have to work within tenure and promotion systems. If the tenure system says, I'm sorry, economics professor, but you made this open textbook and I've never heard of that, therefore you must not get tenure. Like I've only heard of Macmillan. And so if you publish it in Macmillan, then I'd give you tenure. So it's a reasonable question. There's lots of kind of nuances. And again, I'm happy to talk about that in the small room if you'd like.
Yeah, I'll just add that, the issue here for the author is really one of retaining copyright. This isn't about technology. This isn't about distribution. Is if you sign over your copyright of the materials that you write to a publisher in exchange for this bargain of publication, right, you're losing control of your authorship. And that restricts your ability in the future to perhaps pursue different means of distribution for those materials, whether free or licensed. And I think that challenge for the small number of large publishers is, especially the textbook publishers, is they exert a great deal of control over the distribution. And as a result, many authors find themselves striking those bargains of giving up control in order to distribute it. And we are trying to create in the ebook side an alternative ecosystem that supports different models. And Kathryn's trying to advance open educational resources as a different model. Not, again, you don't have to dominate the market to influence it, but we have to have enough of a presence to strike a bit of competitiveness to those textbook publishers or publishers who exert monopolistic practices and are free to basically dictate terms to authors, which then restrict the usability of the content, the ability for it to be used and reused. And frankly, I think it puts a bit of a blanket on authorship and creativity that I think we're trying to foster and grow. Ultimately, this is about not just about the reader, but also about the publication and authorship.
Just to read through some of the comments, Lisa, you had a comment about how this is similar to public libraries being charged more for an ebook copy than a traditional print copy, which we're all experiencing with our tight budgets. And print copy, students are now seeing very expensive ebook purchases prices as the student tries to switch from physical to digital. Mom of 2 college students who's paying more and more for books. Very true.
I think that you're hitting it on the head. A lack of an adequate ebook model that works at scale has created inequities in the marketplace that we see, that Lisa's mentioning.
Then Janice had a comment, working at Pearson among other large publishers in the past, I doubt the teacher has much say if they are working with an impressive publisher. Another question from Anthony for Mr. Cartolano and Professor Shaughnessy. For an academic library looking to transition their reserve collection to a hybrid of e-reserves and physical textbooks, how can they do that with limited budgets? Are OERs the only affordable way?
Kathryn, you want to take a crack at that first?
Sure. First of all, know that you have my deepest sympathies when we're talking about limited budgets. I know that everyone has limited budgets and it seems like they're only shrinking. So OER are not the only way. And we are, if you look up affordable textbook programs, there's statewide programs, there's institutional programs, and textbook affordability, like I would love to have the default be to open, but the fact is we do pay for some types of publications and proprietary information sources that are not available for free and probably won't be for quite some time. So an e-reserve program could just really help, and I think this is where librarians can help, is to work with faculty to find OER where it's possible, to work with them to find resources that the library has already subscribed to, or to find ways to create packages through an e-reserve program that would allow the students not to have to pay extra money. So again, this is that tension between what's seamless, what is the seamless student experience. If you create an e-reserves site where they click on one thing and it's an open resource and they click on something else and it's an article from one of our proprietary databases, they don't really need to know that. But the faculty need to know that, the administrators need to know that. And to the extent that we're trying to create a substitution for e-textbooks, the faculty really need to know this. So the next step is, it's really labor intensive. And as we know, during COVID, everyone is exhausted. We're at the absolute maximum. We're extended through technology. We're extended through working in our homes. And if we're dealing with a new learning management system, asking them to find something else new, it can be really exhausting. So this is where I think libraries can be advocates for this. If we pull together the kinds of resources that faculty would be likely to use, especially in the K through 12 market or in the core course market, if we pre-package stuff so that the professor doesn't have to look all over the place, but can find pretty much all the information resources they might need in one spot, that I think would be really, really helpful in moving to mostly e-reserve and e-accessible, low-cost format.
And I'll just add that what we're trying to do is, whether you can get it, openly available or whether you license it, we just want to provide people with a consistent interface. I mean, look, we're seeing this today with television right now. We're seeing the fragmentation of television. Television was a regulated monopoly created by the government, where the airwaves were provided for free to national distributors like ABC, NBC, and CBS. In return, they all used the same television. You didn't have to have 3 different televisions to watch ABC, NBC, and CBS, who in 1970 had 90% market share of all television in the United States. So as a result, one channel, one TV, multiple channels. Well, today with Apple doing Apple TV and Amazon doing Amazon Prime and Netflix and Disney Plus and Hulu and Peacock, right? Every single one of these is a separate app. There's no guarantee that app's going to work on your device of choice. It just might work, it might not. There are compatibility issues, the software might not work. It's becoming increasingly complex to watch television. That type of issue, multiply that by a factor of 5 or 10 for how we might have to do ebooks in a library setting, where in order to get those books, you have to have 50 different apps. That's not a good outcome for readers. So we have to come to a different model. And yeah, there's Amazon, who's a big player, and Overdrive is a big player, but that might not always be the case. And if we have a fragmented marketplace, I think the readers will suffer, whether they're students in a class or readers in our libraries.
So Lisa put a comment in the chat. Macmillan was restricting public library access to new ebooks with an embargo period of 8 weeks before we could order additional copies. Yes, it was horribly elitist, and they stopped it. I think they had too much lashing back. So saying it, they said it was because of COVID, but in reality, many public libraries stopped purchasing Macmillan titles during that time frame. Okay, and then we'll take one more question. Can someone talk more about how crowdsourcing might work in a public library, perhaps as a program around local history? This is from Deborah Nelson. Anybody?
Strengths and weaknesses, I'm not gonna, oh good, Kathryn can do it. I was gonna say, not my strength.
Well, but it is it's a nice public partnership, right? So one of the things that we really liked was that opportunity that technology affords for crowdsourcing when it comes to archival collections. And the National Archives has the infrastructure already built in, okay? So and God bless them, they have a large digitization wing, and they're knocking themselves out. And to the extent, apparently before COVID, they were like, oh, well, this seems to be working. Apparently during COVID, people started using this citizen archivist tool tremendously. So that's wonderful. So a local history association might not have the same infrastructure to allow people to directly put information into that historical society, but maybe.
Now, I was actually talking about using it as promoting their site within your library and doing sort of tie-in. So yeah, that's good to know.
And what's nice is that they have different foci. So like this month, they are working, National Archives is working on their expanding Black history collections.
Oh, nice.
And next month, so fortunately during the time I was doing this grant, which was about New York City immigration history, they were doing the Ellis Island, was their focus. I was like, yes, this is great. But just because it's the focus then doesn't mean that you can't find that collection.
Sure. Okay.
And
Okay.
it's a
Okay.
good idea
Yeah,
also to look
that's
at.
what I wanted to know. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
And so
Yeah, we've
that's-
done a little bit of this as well at the Rockefeller Archive Center. Interestingly, kind of like, I think we've worked more directly with our local schools in providing kind of like more long, like not just like a one-off, like we're going to go into your class and talk about archives, but like a longer, more extended engagement with a class where we'll have the students actually look at primary source documents and learn how to read them and learn how to evaluate the information they're getting from them. So it's a little bit of like information literacy kind of stuff, which is important for reasons. But interestingly enough, like some of that is also connected with our local library because our physical space is not super accessible, to Kathryn's point, not very physically accessible. It's kind of like hard to get to. And so we've used our local public library. It's kind of like a space to have some of these events and to have the students present their work. So so it's an interesting kind of like connection of those parties, I think, to your point, Deborah.
Thank you. Well, if anyone has any other questions, you can ask each presenter in the breakout rooms, which we're going to segue now. And instead of 10 minutes, we'll have about 8 minutes. So we have enough time. So we stay closer to the noon time as our conclusion so that people can get back to whatever they need to do for the rest of the day. To see everyone popping back in. The diehards is still with us. They're still with us. So it's noon now, and I will make my closing remarks very brief. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, this morning, especially our guest speakers, Hillel, Arnold, Robert Cartolano, Lisa Kropp, and Kathryn Shaughnessy. I also want to thank the executive board, the WLA executive board, Kim Stucco, our vice president, our treasurer, Allison Robbins, who joined us with her 8-week-old baby, who we didn't get to see on camera, but has been with us all along, helping us plan. Our secretary, Joanna Rooney, and our past president, Elaine Provenzano, who's always there to guide us and support us and answer questions when they come out of the blue. And committee chairs, people who joined us today, our volunteers, Krishna, who was not only our captain for today, steering this, Megan Fenton, who Krishna and Megan are both co-chairs of the Professional Development Committee, to Anthony and Myra, who had to leave. They're both the academic chairs, but they also served roles today with the conference, and Kathy Polovic. And I hope I'm not forgetting anyone, but all of the wonderful board members who volunteered today. And I want you to take away, at least if it's only one idea with you, but I know I have dozens of ideas from our discussion today. Just know we did record this, so we will be able to watch this again. I know I want to watch this again, make sure I got all the information. So the recording will be available hopefully within the next week. So thank you to our speakers for allowing us to record you. We do have an exit survey, which is going to appear in your chat box, and we want your feedback. That's how we learn what's working, what's not working, always looking to improve. There's always room for improvement. And our incentive to you is return it by February 27th. So that gives you a little over 3 weeks. Whether it's a positive or negative review, that's fine. But positive is always better, but we'll take what it is. The incentive being we will select one lucky winner to have free admission, free registration to our annual meeting in May. And hopefully it'll be just as good as our event today, if not better. And we're working on all different topics, ideas, trying to pinpoint it. And I think from today, what we learned that everyone is wearing multiple hats. We're not just public librarians, some are academic librarians, special librarians, local historians, archivists. So we're hoping to feature for that, for the conference, for the annual conference, a panel on transitioning to those different types of librarianship and archive work. And you'll be receiving your CE certificate, continuing education, in the email, so stay tuned for that. We hope you can join us for our next Meet and Unwind, which WLA has been hosting monthly, usually on, I think it's the third Thursday of the month. The next one is Thursday, February 18th at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom. Unfortunately, it's on Zoom, so you will have to Zoom in after a long day's work, but maybe it's a good way to unwind and just, you know, tell us what's on your mind, because we're all dealing with the same issues. We also have the March 1st job interview skills during COVID. That's in the afternoon at 4 p.m. So we hope you'll join us for that. Even if you're not looking for a job, it's always good to hone in on these skills, which when you're presenting on a Zoom level. And we encourage everyone, if you're not applying for the Professional Development Award, recommend someone on your staff. They do have to be members of WLA, but this is a $500 award that can be used for a conference fee. It could be used to take an online course. It can be used for whatever is related to your work. So please, if you're not interested or eligible, recommend someone on your staff who you know has a perfect project in mind, because we're happy to receive those applications, and we will be awarding two awards, $500 each, at the annual conference in May. And with that, I think I've covered everything I wanted to mention. We do want everyone to become involved with WLA. If you want to find a way to improve your leadership skills, contact one of us on the board. We'd love to have you help us plan the annual conference, or even if it's just a one-off program. So please don't be shy, contact anyone from the board. And until the next time, please stay safe. And thank you for your time today. Be well.